67 cases of TB is alarming. There is an outbreak of tuberculosis in the Kansas City, Kansas metro area. Who spends prolonged contact with patients than dental practices? A lot of practices have stopped screening patients for respiratory diseases once the COVID pandemic ended. Tuberculosis can be infectious. It's not as easy to spread as COVID or influenza. It really requires a more prolonged contact, persistent cough of 3 to 4 weeks or longer, chest pain, weakness, fever, night sweats, unexplained weight loss. Coughing up blood should be like all the alarm bells should go off. So if a patient comes in for treatment and they are telling us they have these symptoms, then we stop everything right there. We refer this patient for a medical evaluation.
Hey everybody, welcome back into another edition of the Dental Assistant Nation podcast. My name is Kevin Henry, and I'm the founder of Dental Assistant Nation, also the editor-in-chief for drbycuspid.com. Thrilled to have on not only a dear friend, but a returning guest, as always, to the podcast, and that is Mary Gavoni, CDA, RDH. Hey Mary, how are you?
I am great, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
You know what? I always love whenever I get a little ding in the inbox that it's Mary saying we need to talk about something. I love that. So it gives me a chance to catch up with you as well as pick that KOL, key opinion leader brain of yours. Hey, I want to dive into a topic that's really very current right now. But first, just tell our audience a little bit about you because you have such a wealth of knowledge, not only in infection control, but also in dental assisting as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This year is now my 53rd year working in dentistry. Next month will be 53 years, which is a little scary. But the majority of my career, the last 30 or so years, has been spent studying infection control, teaching infection control, and OSHA compliance, and then HIPAA compliance. And so I'm lecturing to consulting with practices all over the country and in other countries as well, and just doing my best. I feel like the little gerbil on the treadmill trying to keep up with all the things that are going on in the world of infection control right now. And one of them that we're going to talk about today hits very close to home.
Yeah, so let's just dive right into it because we're talking about tuberculosis. You are based in Kansas, and this is going on in the Kansas City area. So tell our readers, what do they need to know about this and what's the real deal about it?
Okay, well, the real deal is that there is an outbreak. It actually started in 2024, so it's not like it just started. There is an outbreak of tuberculosis in the Kansas City, Kansas metro area. So it includes Johnson County and Wyandotte County in the Kansas City area. It hasn't been, aren't any reports of cases in other areas of Kansas. I'm in Wichita, so I'm way south of there, but it's been described initially by Kansas health officials, the Kansas Department of Environment and Health, as the largest outbreak of tuberculosis in U.S. history, which it's really not. And they were actually corrected by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. It is the largest outbreak in the past year in the U.S. But irrespective of that, whether it's the biggest or not, 67 cases in one county and 7 in another, for a total of 67 cases of TB is alarming.
Mhm.
It's not a good situation because tuberculosis can be infectious. It's not as easy to spread as COVID or influenza. It really requires a more prolonged contact. But who spends prolonged contact with patients exposed to aerosols or patients that are speaking and perhaps coughing than dental practices? So that's the big concern that I would have at this point because a lot of practices have stopped screening patients for respiratory diseases once the COVID pandemic ended.
Yeah, so what's our concern level here? If I'm a dental assistant going into the practice, how worried should I be right now about, you're thinking about COVID, you're thinking about the flu, and now tuberculosis?
Yeah. Well, if I were seeing patients on a daily basis, I would be concerned. I wouldn't be terrified, but I would be concerned that I could be infectious, like you said, for COVID, for RSV virus, for flu, and there's human metapneumonia virus. That's another thing. And of course, looming out there, we can maybe talk about this at the very end. Looming out there is the potential for human to human spread of avian flu, which keeps growing. The
Fantastic. Just
the
fantastic. Yeah.
I know it's just
Yeah.
crazy. It is crazy. But the bottom line is that we should always be screening our patients for tuberculosis, for a history of tuberculosis, because they may have been exposed and have latent or inactive disease that can't be infectious. It's still good to know that, or for symptoms of tuberculosis infection, which could overlap perhaps with influenza or COVID or something. But the CDC says that the symptoms we should look for would be persistent cough of 3 to 4 weeks or longer, chest pain, weakness, fever, night sweats, unexplained weight loss. Sign me up. Coughing up blood. That coughing up blood should be like the
That should be
all all the alarm bells should go off if
it
patient
should, yes, at
that.
that point, yes.
Yeah. So if a patient comes in for treatment and they are telling us they have these symptoms, then we stop everything right there. We refer this patient for a medical evaluation, probably to their local health department, which is the better place for them to be treated, perhaps than a primary care physician, but they could go to an urgent care facility. But again, the bottom line is we should be screening everybody. Now, patients in the Kansas City metro area, be on high alert that you may be seeing some of these patients in your practice. If they're being treated for active TB disease, more than likely, the health department has said do not go to the dentist. But if they have a dental emergency, they've got a toothache. What do we do? Well, the best case scenario is that they are treated in the hospital, kind of like what we did with COVID with emergency patients. They go to the hospital where they could be treated in a TB isolation room. If it's something like maybe a crown came off and needs to be reseated, although it's not recommended that you treat them during their active phase, wearing your right PPE, an N95 respirator, and wearing a face shield, and making sure that you have all your air purification devices, keep this patient isolated from other patients. It's possible, but in all cases, I would consult with your local health department to find out what's the best thing to do. But screening's the key. We won't know if we're seeing potentially these patients that have maybe been exposed if we're not screening.
Okay, so I want to just put it in crayon if that's okay with you, because I think sometimes we need that. Whenever you're talking about screening, it's literally that health history form and asking if they've had any symptoms, anything else in the last X amount of time, correct? Or is there more to it than that?
Absolutely, absolutely. And in particular, doing that screening when you're confirming patients. So if you're confirming patients with a live phone call, then you ask them. Or if you're using a software platform to do it, texting or robocalls or whatever it is, that you tell your patients if you have respiratory symptoms and a fever, please let us know before your appointment because we may reschedule you. So we need to know that. And I know people worry about having holes in the schedule and all that, but boy, better than the patients coming in and making everybody sick. And now we have to close the office down because
Yeah,
everybody has the
it,
flu or whatever.
and I think it is something that dental assistants, if you're listening to this, this is that information that we always talk about. You need to pass along to the other people in the practice because it's very likely that I'll be perfectly frank. I live in Colorado. I had not heard about this until Mary brought it up to me the other day. And so I think it's really important that you take this information back to those who are scheduling, those who may be admitting the patients, the doctor of the practice, and making sure that everybody understands that while we're on high alert, for colds, flus, things like that this year, there's other things creeping out there as well.
There are. And Kansas isn't the only state right now that has active cases of tuberculosis. It's really everywhere. Kansas has come into the spotlight because of the high number of cases. So
Well, and I'm going to ask you a little bit of a dicey question here. And some of our listeners, just get ready because this is a political question, okay? We know that with the new administration of the White House, there has been some rumblings about the CDC and what can and cannot be communicated to the general public, to health practitioners, and everything else. While we're in this kind of flux of where we get our information, what do we do in a case like this if you're a dental practice and you need to find out, dare I say, the real truth?
Very good question. The first thing I would say is don't go to social media because we
Oh, there
don't
you go.
know that that information is vetted or accurate. And I have been losing sleep for a couple of weeks since this announcement was made about, oh my gosh, the CDC is not allowed to communicate. What's happened is the Health Alert Network announcements that would come out, which would have announced this issue in Kansas City, that have announced in previous years the issues with dental unit water lines and cases, infections that have happened. That is not happening. Neither is the weekly newsletter, the MMWR, Morbidity Mortality Weekly Report, which doesn't always contain infection control information or information for dentistry, but nonetheless, there's a lot of great information that we like to access. And if you're on an update list for the CDC, that's not happening right now either. And we heard yesterday that there was a lot of information about HIV and vaccinations that is being scrubbed or removed or hidden,
Yeah.
whatever, the CDC website. But I've been checking around this morning and there still is a lot of information there. The tuberculosis page does not address the recent outbreak, but there is a lot of good information there about the basics of, signs and symptoms and historical outbreaks, nothing recent. So the trend that I'm seeing is that current information may not be there, but there is some historical data that has not been scrubbed yet, but we don't know how far this is going to go. So I would say, first of all, check the CDC website because that is our gold standard and you might be able to find what you need there. But then we go to the Association for Dental Safety, formerly known as OSAP. They will have current information.
Great.
Then, although the US has pulled its support from the World Health Organization, we still can go there and get information. The American Dental Association is staying on top of this, the American Medical Association, and there are other groups. I've seen a number of doctors on social media recently who are speaking out against this whole issue with the CDC, and they are putting up lists of organizations that are credible that you can go to. So I've been compiling all of that to make it available, and I will have a list on my website,
Awesome.
marygavoni.com, of organizations and links where you can go to get information. But again, I caution people about taking information directly from social media because we just don't know if it's accurate or not.
Yeah.
And the other thing that I've been working on, and this whole thing with tuberculosis has really forced me to complete it sooner than I was planning on, is I've created little mini courses, something you could listen to at your staff meeting, something you could do as a lunch and learn on very specific topics. So the one that's being published this week is on tuberculosis. What are the facts we need to know? How do we screen patients? Signs and symptoms? What are the resources? What do we really need to know? So those will be available on my website for listeners of the DA Nation podcast. So if you go to marygavoni.com, you'll see a link on the homepage for those mini courses.
Join us at CE on the Beach, June 26th to 28th, 2025, at the stunning Westin Grand Cayman Resort and Spa. This is the ultimate destination event for dentists, teams, coaches, and speakers. Save your spot now and get $150 off with promo code KHENRY. Visit ceonthebeach.com to register today.
That's fantastic. And marygavoni.com, we will have that in the show notes. So it's real easy for you to find, real easy for you to click upon because you just said it. We have to know what's going on and we have to be able to ask questions and learn more from reliable sources and not our friends out there who think they may know.
Well, and also patients. Also patients, Kevin, that are coming in and they're hearing stuff or reading things on social media and think that they're true. And we have to help dispel the myths. Not that, and I don't mean to say that everything we see on social media is wrong, but we all know that there is an abundance of conspiracy theorists out there, and we
Yes.
need to steer clear of those. We follow science, we follow facts, and we bring the best, most accurate information to our patients.
And I'm just going to plug another place, and that is the Compliance Divas podcast. where Mary is a part of a great group of women who follow that science, who are very knowledgeable in all things, whether it's OSHA, whether it's keeping yourself safe, infection control, whatever it might be. So the Compliance Divas podcast should be on your must playlist, as well as Dental Assistant Nation, of course. So,
Of course. Thank you.
well, thank you for bringing this to our attention, because I think that so often dental practices work in such a bubble and they're so head down trying to get through this day, they don't realize some of the things that are going on outside the walls that can creep in and really impact what they do. So thank you for that.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. And it's so true. I remember those days of being in the bubble and then being out in the real world at a meeting and saying, oh my gosh, I never knew that. So, yeah, no surprises.
None. We don't like surprises, that's for sure. So, Mary, as always, you email me anytime, because I know you've got your finger on the pulse of things out there, and I so appreciate you bringing this to our attention.
Oh, you're welcome, Kevin. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you who listen to this episode of the Dental Assistant Nation podcast. We absolutely appreciate people like Mary, those experts out there, those reliable sources to keep you safe, keep your patients safe, and make sure that you go home at night safe as well. Till next time, Kevin Henry, founder of Dental Assistant Nation, signing off, and as always, wishing you nothing but success ahead.